Hello, everybody. Obviously, we're not releasing our regular episode this week. We're participating in act of solidarity. Noah's going to tell you a little bit about that really quick.
In honor of George Floyd and so many before him who have lost their lives to police brutality, and to hold space for those ongoing protests in our home states, we are going to be participating in Podcast Blackout. And like Jared said, we are not going to be releasing a regular episode this week.
Yeah. I mean, everybody is watching the news right now, and a lot of people are in the street and, on social media and stuff like that. And very clearly, there's a bunch of awful stuff happening, and honestly, a lot of good stuff that's happening in response to it. So we just didn't feel like it was that we should treat this week like it's just any other week or something like that. And I don't know. I mean, Noah, have you been sort of okay during this week? Because that's the other thing. I think we kind of need to check on everybody and make sure. Because we're forgetting, like, there's a lot of important stuff, but it's also a very, like, emotionally difficult, like, traumatic stuff. I mean, we've gone from COVID to, like, a lot of people, even if you're not really political, you're just seeing, like, burning cop cars in the street and stuff like that. So are you doing okay, Noah?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I think emotionally for everybody during this time, especially, people of color, it's just a hard and weird time. It's an awful time. I mean, there's so much anger. Everybody is angry in one way or another. Everybody's tired in one way or another. And I think the biggest thing that's different about this time, if that's even the right word to say, with this, is that I think it's really painting a picture of leadership and the lack of it.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it's just, there's nothing good coming from the people that can actually make change. And it's only inciting more violence, more hurt, more anger, bigger protests, rioting. Everything is just kind of it's just building. It's continuously building. But I think the biggest thing during this time is to not stop. I think with something like this, it can't be every other time when something like this happens, or even school shootings, if people talk about it for a month and then it goes away and then it happens again. I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good point. I think we should at least underscore that the riots are important. The protests are important. It is important afterwards. Every one of my activist friends are saying this, to politically organize after this. Don't let this go to waste, because in a lot of ways, the system, people in power, are just waiting for it to die down, to go back to doing what they were usually doing, what they were doing before. They still have the same reasons and motivations. So again, it's not for me or Noah or anybody else to tell you, like, who to join or what, but the point is that, like, there are plenty of activist organizations, plenty of political organizations you can be involved with. So after this week, go do that.
I did want to say, while we're on that topic, there's a great resource if you're not sure how to help. You don't need money to help. You absolutely do not. Everybody has a chance to, help this cause and make a difference. I will put this link in the episode description and all over social media. But if you go to blacklivesmatter.carrd.co, that website has all the petitions, a place to text and call if you need somebody, a place to donate, resources, where protests are, and any questions about anything that you need. It's all in one easy to use resource.
I think it's also important to say right now that, look, this podcast is done by 3 white people, and I think everybody has a responsibility to sort of have a political perspective on this, and to, in this moment especially, to just say unequivocally that Black Lives Matter, that we support that. But past that, at least for right now, obviously, we have a lot of feelings and political perspectives and stuff like that, but it's not the time for us to sort of go off and I don't know, just tell you what our theories are or whatever. But there are a few things that at least I want to say, just in terms of what's going on with the protests. And the only reason I feel like I have a responsibility to do that is that I've been to several at this point, and I mean, with different levels of like, sort of almost violence. I put violence in quotes there, or like, discipline, different, and, things where they were completely peaceful. Absolutely. Yeah. And I feel like there's mischaracterization in the media and on social media, and especially, and sometimes it's just like people that haven't gone have a misconception about how these things are conducted. I think the first thing I want to say is that I keep hearing the word violence applied to these protests, even the ones that appear, when you look and they appear to have gotten out of control and things like that. And that, to me, that's just untrue and an inappropriate way to describe that. And the reason I say this is that, like, these things are destructive at times, yes, but burning cop cars are not violent. Breaking windows are not violent. I'm not endorsing any of these behaviors, but the reason I say that is that what is violent is spraying, a woman in the eyes with mace from a foot away. What is violent is hitting unarmed people with sticks with very little provocation. What's violent is choking a black man to death, and what's violent is shooting a black man who's unarmed. And the reason I think that's important is when you call these protests violence, given what they're protesting, it's obscene to call it violence. And I guess the reason I say that is just that, like, a lot of times when people on the media want to call these things violent or point it out like that, some of them, not everybody, some of them are well-intended, but some people are trying to delegitimize them and make it seem like they must be disconnected from a rational, meaningful cause and movement, and because, and to ignore the civil unrest. They want to suggest that, it would otherwise be completely peaceful, like the St. Paddy's Day parade, and that evil political people go in there and stir it up. And my experience is that is not what happens on the ground. What often happens on the ground is that the police kick these things off. I've seen that happen 6 times now, where the police have basically incited basically what would appear to be a riot. So, I just think that kind of needs to be said. And I guess one last thing on that is that people have this idea about Martin Luther King's protests, and it's important to understand that people use that as the litmus test for what a protest should look like, not because it's a fair or reasonable standard, but because it's an almost impossible standard to meet. So there's this feeling, this idea that, like, the only good protests are ones where, like, people have to stoically march along, and while they're being, like, beaten or tear gassed, and if they so much as look angry, then they're being violent. And the irony there is they're not using King's legacy to appreciate or to create solidarity with movements like this. They're using King's legacy to basically, delegitimize these movements.
I do want to say a couple things on that too, because I've seen it. Not that it even matters, but I've lost, followers or Facebook friends, even family members have unfriended me because they post that meme that's going around of the Martin Luther King and the march, and it says it was peaceful, like this march was peaceful and he didn't do any violence or anything like that. A couple things with that. One, there's a special place in hell for white people lecturing black people on how they should protest and using Martin Luther King.
Yeah, absolutely.
In that way. Another thing is what led to that? And even during that march, there was violence. It was not incited by them, but there was violence. And another thing, Martin Luther King himself, 3 years after that, said that the riots are the language of the unheard. I mean, it's not, you can't do that. It's just, it blows my mind that people are using that. And look what happened in the end. They still killed him, even with the peaceful protest.
Absolutely, and I think that the problem is that like you can cherry pick that kind of like even you can actually cherry pick criticism of riots by civil rights leaders, even radicals like Huey P. Newton has been against at different times certain riots, but against there is special because what Huey talks about, like, and he has a really good book, Revolutionary Suicide. He talks about the fact that he didn't think it was a good tactic to organize through, but in the very same thing you're saying, he was certainly sympathetic to the people rioting, and he certainly held the people in power and the police responsible for the riot happening. And that's the difference that people miss here, is that like, and I just to go back to how these things turn into riots. This is the point. People don't decide to have a riot. What generally happens is that people spontaneously organize or more disciplined, organize in a disciplined way, and then they are accosted by the police. The police try to clear them out from a First Amendment assembly, and then it turns into a riot when people are sprayed with mace or beaten with sticks or what have you. And then, of course, then it looks like a crazy riot. And then, the television captures that, and people at home in middle America are like, oh, these crazy rioters.
It's just, I don't think, I mean, especially us as, white males, that we really don't have a place on how to tell people of color how they should protest and how they shouldn't. And I think that's the biggest thing with this. And most of the stuff, like, you're right, most of the stuff that's being shown on the news and some social media out there is showing really what's happening. It's great. But the news is capturing the stuff that sells. And that's one thing you have to realize, that news, no matter what you think, between CNN and Fox News, they're going to show the things that sell. And so you have to do your own research, you have to educate, and you have to talk to people that are part of that movement. You even get involved with it. I mean, it's frustrating. The whole thing is very frustrating. At the base of it, why is racism tolerated? Why is it still here? There's nothing that anybody can say that this is okay. You're upset that people are saying we're being treated unfairly. Why are you upset at that? Like, that's the one thing that I want to understand. I don't get it.
Yeah, to me, it's about priorities right now. And because, if you're the kind of person, there's a lot of liberals that have this opinion where, they're taking this time to criticize what they see as the parts of the protest that they don't like, or the tactics they don't like, but the point is that there's time for that later. If you look at the people on the right who are supporting the police, they are unequivocal and homogenous in their voice. They're all just for what's going on in terms of the police brutality, right? At least in terms of, like, none of them are criticizing the cops. But when you look on the left, when you look at, like, a lot of Democrats and liberals and stuff like that, a lot of them are not taking this time to express solidarity with the movement and just say, look, Black Lives Matter, we're against what the police are doing, and that's it. And I guess my point is, like, this is the time to support the movement and people on the ground that are being hurt by the police, and generally, like, the idea to create a solid sort of voice about that issue. Because when you take this time to do these mealy-mouthed criticisms, you're only confusing the narrative in the media more, and it's easier for people that want to dismiss this sort of movement. It's easier for them to point and say, "Oh, it's just chaos. It's just silliness," and that's not good.
One last thing that I'll say on this, because I feel like, we are using our platform in the way that we can, and we will. Anybody that is donating on Patreon, we will be donating the money that we get this month, and probably the month after that, to organizations to help this and to help LGBTQ people of color as well. So, if you should donate if you can. We're using the money that people give to support us, to support something that's bigger than us and more important than doing a podcast. So we decided to just use this platform that we have, the small one that we do, to, just spread the word and hopefully share some resources that help people even trying to navigate what they should do. And the last thing that I'll say with with the rioting and the so-called violence that people are saying, I mean, broken windows can be replaced. Black lives cannot. So I think people's priorities need to be straightened up and focus on what you're actually talking about instead of buildings being hurt. Or who cares? I see more outrage on that than, people of color being killed. So.
Yeah, and people loot after earthquakes. Like that's the thing that they're not connecting here, is that like the looting is not planned, and the looting is often I'm not blaming anybody who's looting. Honestly, that's not my position here at all. But I just want to be clear that like the lootings happen when there's civil unrest, when people are insecure, when there's a disaster, and there are opportunists that wait for that kind of stuff. But the people that are like using the looting to delegitimize what this is all about are, I think, dishonest, and I think they're bad actors, and it's just inappropriate.
I mean, look at all the white people that stormed all the Targets and took all the toilet paper whenever COVID hit. So,
oh yeah, and on that note, just real quick, this is a black-led movement, and it's unequivocally about Black lives. But if you don't have experience with the literature or actually acting in these movements, it's a multiracial movement,
right?
This isn't, as I say, this is not black versus white. This is cop or authority or the status quo or what have you versus the people.
Right.
And I mean, it doesn't, regardless of, I mean, I do think it should be a black-led movement. I think that the place that white people have right now is to, stand in support. Yeah, and stand in support and listen, and absolutely. But I'm just saying we have a responsibility too, and it's not something that if you're a white person or Asian or Latino or whomever, this isn't something you should identify with this. This isn't something that you should say, oh, it's their thing, I wish them luck. Right. These are our brothers and sisters. These are our citizens, and it's absolutely. It's crucial that you, like Noah was saying, that you get involved in some way, and that can be bailing people out of jail. That can be donating money to these causes. That you can actually. I know the other thing. I know I've said a lot, but like the vast majority of these demonstrations aren't even confrontational. Like I've been to a few where it literally it's just a march, and and you can do that, and you don't have to feel like you're going to be hurt or something like that. So there's so many ways to be involved in this, but it's the people's movement. It's not, just a thing that it is for other
right. Don't feel
people to worry about,
because you don't feel excluded. The more voices need to be heard, and people, that are not black or that aren't in that community need to use their resources or even their privilege to make those voices heard. Okay, and then we wanted to end this with saying all of the lives that have been lost from police brutality. So Eric Gardner, John Crawford III, Michael Brown, Ezell Ford,
Dante Parker, Michelle Cusseau, Laquan McDonald,
Tanisha Anderson, Akai Gurley, Tamir Rice, Rumain Bryson, Jermaine Reed,
Matthew Ajibade, Frank Smart, Natasha McKenna, Tony Robinson, Anthony Hill,
Maya Hall, Philip White, Eric Harris, Walter Scott, William Chapman II,
Alexia Christian, Brendan Glenn, Victor Emmanuel LaRosa, Jonathan Sanders,
Freddie Blue, Joseph Mann, Salvado Ellswood, Sandra Bland,
Albert Joseph Davis, Darius Stewart, Billy Ray Davis, Samuel DeBose,
Michael Savvy, Brian Keith Day, Christian Taylor, Troy Robinson,
Assam's Pharaoh Manley, Felix Kumi, Keith Harrison McLeod, Junior Prosper,
Lamontez Jones, Patterson Brown, Dominic Hutchinson, Anthony Ashford,
Alonzo Smith, Tyree Crawford, India Kager, Levante Biggs,
Michael Lee Marshall, Jamar Clark, Richard Perkins, Nathaniel Harris Pickett,
Benny Lee Tigner, Michael Espinal, Michael Noel, Kevin Matthews, Betty Jones,
Quintanillo Laguerre, Keith Childress Jr., Jeanette Wilson, Randy Nelson.
Antroni Scott, Wendell Celestine, David Joseph, Callan Roquemore, and Zaquan.
Christopher Davis, Marco Loud, Peter Gaines, Tori Robinson, Darius Robinson.
Kevin Hicks, Mary Trucolo, DeMarcus Simmer, Willie Tillman,
Seville Smith, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, Terrence Crutcher.
Paul O'Neill, Alteria Woods, Jordan Edwards, Aaron Bailey,
Ronell Foster, Stephon Clark, Anton Rose II, Botham Jean,
Pamela Turner, Dominique Clayton, Tatiana Jefferson, Christopher Whitfield,
Christopher McCorvey, Eric Reason, Michael Lorenzo Dean, Deanna Tyler.
and of course George Floyd. And that's the list of the slain people.
And it keeps growing. It's grown since George Floyd. And then just, again, that website to help in any way that you can and find resources is blacklivesmatter.carrd.co.
Black lives